that brings us now to our first panel discussion. The impact of COVID on digital education is no secret. They have mentioned it before all around the world. Teachers, students, pupils, and not to forget parents have faced massive challenges. This results in urgent tasks for policymakers. Our next panel will look at that and much more. Panel moderator will be Stefan Geiffer. Stefan is the director of the National Agency for EU Higher Education Cooperation at the DAAD. And who now will introduce you guests and subjects. Now it's your turn, Stefan, please.
Thank you very much, Dimitrov, for this kind introduction. This is my first hackathon I'm taking in, and I hope I will succeed. Good afternoon to everybody from in the world to this DigiEduHack from Bonn on this sunny autumn afternoon, at least here in Bonn. This DigiEduHack is on the future of digital education. With COVID-19 in this year, the last month, the future of digital education became present. In March, April of this year, nearly 20,000 German students were abroad with Erasmus. 3/4 of them succeeded to finish their study programs successfully, and half of them did it online from Germany. How was this possible? It was possible because the universities offered possibilities, digital possibilities. The student accepted them, and we as Erasmus administrators changed our rule very quickly, which is not easy in generally. So how was it possible, and how will this go on? That's what we will discuss in the next 45 minutes in a session about the lessons learned from COVID-19 crisis and the implications for policy making in the field of education in the future. I'm very happy to discuss this with 4 experts, 2 student representatives, 1 professor, and 1 representative of the European Commission. Let me introduce the panelists of today's, and ladies first. I start with Gohar Hovhannisyan. I hope I pronounced this right. She's president of the European Students' Union. Within the union, her main focus is about quality assurance, and she studied business in Armenia. Welcome, Gohar. And 1 question to you, in link with with digital. What do you prefer, book or ebook? Gohar?
Yes, I hope you can hear me now.
I hear you very well.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Hi, dear colleagues. Thank you so much for hosting me in this session. I would say that my preference depends on the timing. If I have a lot of time to enjoy a book, I prefer a real physical book. If I don't have a lot of time and I'm just reading kind of on my way, you know, in the public transportation or in an airplane or somewhere, I would just do it with my phone on an ebook.
Okay, very well. Let me turn to Kaspars Ābelnīca, who is a representative of the Erasmus Student Networks, where he is the web project administrator. He's one of the 5 elected members of the international board of the Erasmus Student Networks, and he is an enthusiast of computer science, which is studying, and he's from Riga. So 1 question to you also regarding to our subject. What is your favorite digital tool, Kaspars?
Good afternoon. Thanks for the introduction. It's a very good question. I think that, to me, the most important and favorite digital tools are those that are beautiful in their simplicity and don't try to be anything more than they are. For example, I currently play around with a writer software that just blocks the entire screen for me and allows me to just focus on my writing without any distractions. So indeed, I find beauty in simplicity when it comes to digital tools.
Perfect. Welcome to Professor Mark Brown, who is the first holder of the Chair of Digital Learning at the Dublin City University and Director of the National Institutes for Digital Learning. Mark has over 30 years of experiences of working in the area of blended, online and digital education, and has served in key leadership positions in the development and implementation of digital learning and teaching initiatives. Hi, Mark. My question to you is, among your many publications, which one has the funniest title?
Well, thank you for that. That's a very interesting question, to say the least. Actually, I like to have good titles. So I think a play on the word down under is one of the best titles I have, because I'm originally from New Zealand. And in the spirit of this hack, you might see that I'm in a hacked classroom. But down under in New Zealand, we like to think that actually we're at the top of the world, not the bottom of the world.
Okay, I have to read this. Last but not least, it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Georgi Dimitrov from the European Commission, where he is working in the Directorate General for Education and Culture as a policy officer. He was involved in various roles in the setting up of the European Institute of Innovation and Technology, and currently Georgi is leading the project update of the Digital Education Plan. My question to you related to our subject, Georgi, is have you ever joined or maybe ever given a virtual party? Very important question in the Erasmus context in these days.
Hi, Stefan, and good afternoon to everyone. Yes, indeed, I have given a virtual party. It was just 3 months ago on the occasion of the birthday of a very close friend of mine in Bulgaria, where I am from. So I gave this party. It was just like here over Zoom with a little bit more people, even though I'm sure that perhaps in the end of the day, you would have much the bigger audience.
You have more experience than me. I only have digital apparatives, but I will learn from you. So now we have 45 minutes. We're a little bit behind schedule, so please be short in the answers. We will turn around 3 questions. Where are we staying now? What is new in what we are living, and what do we want for the future? And my first question is for you, Gohar, where we are now. What is the feedback the ESU received with regard to the process required to adapt to the reality of the global pandemic? Would you say that the crisis provided a chance for meaningful students' participation on university management level or in higher education governance more general?
Thank you for that question, because it's a really kind of deep reflection that requires to answer to that question. I think we have seen really different pictures from our member unions. Like, we cover 40 different countries across Europe, and of course the picture hasn't been the same in every country. We have seen cases where the cooperation, kind of the emergency cooperation, has worked really well among the university leadership and the student unions on the local level or on the national level with different authorities. However, we have also seen cases that this didn't really work, and students would protest on different issues such as student data protection or the housing issues students started to face. So I think the picture has been very different. But what I can obviously say that this has been a challenging time for the student unions, not just to kind of stand for the rights of the students and continue doing the work that they are doing, but also to organizationally kind of reflect on themselves and understand, okay, how should they as an organization change? This has touched both us at the European Students' Union, our members, and also their members on the university level, because I think we had to refine our activities massively. And I would say we tried to make this challenge, but we would still want decision makers to support student unions more in meeting these type of challenges.
Thank you, Gohar, for this general framework, how the student unions was implied in the situation of the crisis. Now, Kaspars, what is the feedback you and ESN received from the students during the crisis and the measures which have been taken? Was this adequate? What should have been different? And how did the students live in this crisis?
Thank you for the question. I will build in many ways on what Gohar just said, just from a slightly different angle in terms of mobility experiences for students. especially when the pandemic started, there was generally a lack of clarity of what the current situation is going to be. So what we in our membership, ESN is an organization that's in 42 countries, received were questions along the lines of, what is the current situation? Are Erasmus mobility is going to continue? Should I, as a student, go back home? Should I stay in my host country, especially with the context of borders being closed? So there was generally just a lack of clarity that even we couldn't immediately provide the answers for, because the situation was so rapidly changing. So what we tried to do was to focus on this aspect of trying to provide more overview and information for students. So first thing, of course, what we did is we reached out to all of our members, as well as stakeholders such as national agencies that coordinate Erasmus Plus and the international relations offices in universities, to try to get ESN and their local universities to interact, to discuss, and to come up with strategies how to communicate with students, how to update them about the recent changes, both in the universities and on the national scale, to have a better overview. We also launched a survey that we managed to get 21,900 plus responses from, to have a general overview of what students were currently facing and what was their outlook on the situation back in March, which was especially when the pandemic really kicked off. And we also disseminated that to our membership and universities to also give them some kind of reference on what's currently going on in terms of mobility. Building up on that, of course, we also had to relook at our own key operating principle, which is students helping students. So we tried to, as ESN, also bring more socializing opportunities. So our organizations will do things such as online yoga classes, or even things as simple as game nights or language tandems, to make sure the students are not alone. So I think that the key feedback and the key takeaways from especially the start of the pandemic was that it is always important to have clear information, especially in international languages, from both national institutions and the universities in situations such as these, and to ensure that students are not self-isolated by themselves and still have a chance to meet, interact, and continue their life in what I guess we now call the new normal.
Thank you, Kaspars. What you described is my work and the work of the agency over the last months. We put all the information we had as quickly as we could into frequently asked questions in order to help you and the students. Let's move from the form to the context, Mark. Taking up the issue of digital skills and digital literacy, do we have to learn how to learn online? So from what you see and the many projects you have been involved in, how has the pandemic changed the approach of blended online and digital education? It was a choice, now it is, we have to do it. How does this interfere in the content?
Well, thank you for what I think are two questions. So let me answer that question about learning how to learn online. My answer is absolutely yes. I think there's plenty of the evidence of that. But then I'm a little biased, as our team at Dublin City University launched back in September an online course on this very issue through the Future Learning platform. It's called A Digital Edge, Essentials for the Online Learner. That's my little advertisement. Actually, so far we've had about 6,000 people take the course. Well over 50% have completed it. And really notably, the course was designed around the European Commission's new LifeComp framework, which emphasizes some of those social skills and also focus on well-being, which is something we've also learned. But can I just say that learning how to learn online isn't just a functional thing, it's also critical. By analogy, just because someone has learned how to drive a motor car doesn't mean that they know how to navigate getting around our complex streets and our roading systems in a large city. It tells us very little, for example, about their knowledge of the impact that their driving is having on our congested cities, on other people's lives, to the quality of our air, and of course to the climate. So our future really depends on developing more critical, lifelong online or digital learners. On the second part of the question, very quickly, about changes to education, I hope the pandemic pandemic has actually helped to challenge some of the myths, misinformation, and perhaps even sacred cows that people assume about face-to-face education always being the best form of teaching and learning. We've had some amazing stories of innovation during the pandemic that just couldn't have taken place in a traditional classroom and certainly not a lecture theatre. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Georgi, digital education became much more important this year. You started to work on the European Digital Action Plan of the European Commission already before the crisis. What changed with the crisis for your plan, and what are its main priorities?
Thank you very much, Stefan. So maybe with the second one first. So the action plan is the strategy of the European Commission for addressing education and training in the digital age, and it covers the programming period of the Commission, which extends between 21 and 27. So it is a long-term initiative. And then I should then try to answer your first question, which is in fact the more relevant right now. The action plan that we put forward right now is not the first initiative in this domain. In fact, we already launched what you may call, for the purpose of today's audience, a beta version back in 2018. Beta because we wanted to test out the idea whether it is a meaningful and purposeful way to deal with digital education at the policy level, because this is a question which is not necessarily having only yes or no answers. And there are many, many people who discuss this from different perspectives. So as you rightly said, we started, in fact, to work on the current initiative back in fact, December, January. And then COVID came. And of course, this has been the key driver, and some call it a game changer. And I would like to highlight perhaps three main parts, which, if you like, somehow relate to COVID and the lessons that we have learned, but perhaps extend also a little bit beyond them. And let me just add to this that our lessons learned have been based on a very broad stakeholder consultation, which included a variety of stakeholders, some of which are present here, in fact, and many citizens, but also private sector, and a very, very diverse group of organizations. So what are the three main points that I would like to mention here? The first one is that even though COVID-19 has been the leitmotif, if you like, on digital education in the last 6 or 8 months, we are talking about a much bigger transformational change for education and training, which extends beyond what is hopefully going to be soon the past experience with COVID. And this is why, with the action plan, we address the short-term lessons we drew from COVID, but also the longer-term question of how education and training should adapt to the digital transformation. And this is important because we are not in a spirit of actionism and firefighting, even though this is very, very important, and of course, primarily today, the priority perhaps even. Second, the two key strategic priorities which we have identified are, on the one side, building a high-performing digital education ecosystem. And here, what we mean really is the need for connectivity, broadband, digital equipment, which is suitable, but also teacher digital skills and organizational capabilities in schools, universities, and other type of educational institutions. With other words, what we need is the ability to manage this whole digital transformation with a lot of, let's say, hardcore conditions that have to be met before even we can talk about quality and inclusive digital education. And this is very important, and many people have spoken just before me, some of the students as well in the intro, about that problem. So this is very important, and in Europe, we have a big issue in specific regions with that question on the high-performing education ecosystem. The second point is really the question of digital skills and competences and how we approach this over the short and the long term. Now, many people, in fact, have found even a benefit in COVID because they have increased their digital skills. For example, we are now much more familiar here today with all these Zoom and video conferences. than we were perhaps 1 year ago. And the same goes for many students and for many teachers. But the reality in Europe is that we still have a very large population with low digital skills. Going forward, this is a huge liability, both for competitiveness, but also for, I would call, digital citizenship, because we do need a broad and big concept of what digital skills are. We need them to be also addressing phenomena like disinformation and fake news through education and training, and also artificial intelligence. So this is why, with those two priorities, if you like, high-performing digital education ecosystem and then skills and competences, we have offered a long-term strategic vision. My final point, and the third lesson that we have learned, is that this spirit of innovation that also Mark spoke about is really a question of cooperation. So we have seen a very high level of cooperation at the European level. We have seen it because there were problems, of course, with the national agencies. There was a lot of exchange and cooperation, but we have also seen the ability and the willingness to arrive at solutions, something that was not there before, in particular in the domain of digital learning or digital education. And this is why, for us, the question of enhanced cooperation, better cooperation and coordination at the EU level on topics of digital education is fundamental, and we have put forward some specific actions in the action plan to promote this at the EU level over the long term.
Thank you very much. This virus definitely is a game changer. And Kaspars, you conducted a research on the ESN level, how the students were affected with it. Could you please share with us some of your main findings regarding the use of digital alternatives to mobile experience, especially of Erasmus students?
Certainly. Looking at specifically the online experience of students, because it actually was very impressive to see that only around a quarter of students had their mobility stopped completely, so with no substitute whatsoever. With the rest having the opportunity to continue primarily online, either in their host country or by going back home and continuing this. And the key findings, actually, this brings me quite closely to what Mark said before about how it's important to learn how to work digitally, were that in fact there were interesting innovations and developments that would have been thought not possible before that. And in fact, that this innovation was vital, because in situations where we did not see that, we would see students being underwhelmed by what was offered to them, by the lack of infrastructure or the lack of competencies provided and built both for the students participating and the learning staff, and certain specific challenges. For example, we had a case of students that had to go back to Asia during the pandemic and then somehow had to figure out how to participate with all of the time zones difference because the studies would still continue in European time. And the second key thing, as there was really a twofold answer that students gave us on this, was that they were also underwhelmed by the fact that they ended up being by themselves, working by themselves, especially because they decided to go on an Erasmus exchange to open their horizons, to learn new cultures, meet new people, and they felt that this had been taken away from them, of course, by outside forces and not specifically because of any action. But this in many ways showcases that there are quite a few key steps that could be made to make this possible and improve the situation. Firstly, the fact that there needs to be a clear infrastructure and competency as a foundation for online learning, as this will allow for innovations to take place. It will allow for more engagement between the participants in the process, because we can see with the DigiEduHack itself, for example, that the real new ideas and the real innovation does not come when students work on individual assignments. It's when they have an opportunity to get into a room to discuss and bring their own ideas, opinions on the table, and that's what fosters innovation. And secondly, to also bring to the forefront all of the different types of mobility in terms of mobility. So when we look at virtual exchanges, blended mobility and physical mobility, to show students the different added benefits of all of them, to show that they're not alternatives and they are not out there to replace one another, but instead that they actually are different dimensions that they can explore, that they can pick and choose based on what's accessible for them at that time. and what's best for them at that time. Because if we do not do this, then we kind of fall into this trap of the digital transformation where the new solution we present is no more accessible than we had before, or is even perhaps less accessible than we had before. So I think it's important to not hesitate with the innovation, to make the big steps, but also offer the support needed to make these steps possible on a European level.
You said we have to make big steps, and this brings me to the next question, which is for Mark. The Digital Education Action Plan is a big step, and it formulates the vision of high quality, inclusiveness, and accessible digital education in Europe. My question is, what comes first for you, policy or practice?
You know how to ask the good questions. Well, the answer to the question, I think, really depends on your definition of policy. See, for me, policy isn't just those official publications that sit on the shelf, often gathering dust, or maybe more these days filed away in an old computer file. Policy is also a process, and good policy engages all stakeholders in the process, particularly, I should add, those involved in practice, including learners. It's a loop, if you like, or perhaps even better, a concentric circle. It keeps going. And I happen to think a really positive outcome of the pandemic crisis was how the European Commission was able to extend the consultation period and increase through technology, ironically, the opportunities for everyone to contribute to the development of the new Digital Education Action Plan. But I think the key point here is all stakeholders need to be involved, and it needs to be both enabling rather than constraining. And everyone has agency, if you like, as a micro policy maker, because policy is really about making choices explicit. And the choices we have looking to the future are not just at macro level, but they also are choices at the meso, the micro level, and even the nano level. Every habitat, if you like, within the digital education ecosystem has choices to make. For me, I guess, ultimately summing up, the very best policy is when it's truly translated and enacted into practice by all of those players or stakeholders. And that really does remain a challenge at all levels, I think.
Mark said that good policy includes stakeholders, and that brings me directly to one of the main stakeholders, the students. Gohar, regarding quality assurance, where does the ESU see the greatest challenges when it comes to digital learning and teaching? Quality assurance is one of your favorite subjects.
Yes, indeed it is. It's a subject that drove me to student movement back from Armenia when I was a student, and I was dissatisfied with my with the quality of my study experience. So yeah, I think there are major challenges that the universities are facing now in regards to quality assurance for this new way of digital learning. Of course, in the first months when emergency learning happened, quality assurance wasn't a priority. But then now, when we are looking into building the next, current term and the next season for the life of the students, quality assurance is a major challenge because we need some flexibility in the approaches of quality assurance, and we need our different units or national agencies that are working on quality assurance to be actually equipped to facilitate quality assurance of digital learning. But particularly, I think we're on the classroom level where challenges come. This is, of course, about the preparedness of the teachers to be well equipped enough with capacity to deliver good learning experiences for students via digital tools, but also, of course, their capacity to, let's say, refine the learning outcomes that students need to acquire during their study experiences, because as we know, some part of the learning outcomes are very much based on the social experience that students get in the university. However, when we move to a virtual learning environment, making sure that the social experience still happens might be often challenging. So we need to make sure that our quality assurance procedures look into all these details, especially when we're talking about quality assurance for programs. And connected to the learning outcomes, a problem that arises as well is the workload. Both teachers and students report that with virtual learning, their workload has increased extensively. However, yes, the credits that we are allocating for learning outcomes based on the workload that the students or the teachers are having during the course, where primarily the students, these ECTS did not necessarily change. So these are all challenges that our quality assurance needs to address. And the final one would be addressing the new modes of learning, like addressing quality assurance for the new modes of learning that are coming, more flexible and non-degree modes of learning, such as the ones that are being given by micro-credentials, short courses, that do not lead to a bachelor or master degree, but we need to make sure that they are quality assured. So these are the biggest challenges that I can identify.
Okay, thank you. Georgi, good policy includes stakeholders, Mark said. As you're making good policy, can you describe us how the structured dialogue between stakeholders with regard to the field of quality assurance and beyond concerning the challenges of digital education is realized in your elaboration of the Digital Action Plan?
Yes, with pleasure, and I would also give you a specific example of how we have proposed to do it and how we intend to do it. But perhaps let's start by the statement that the question of the transnational exchange and more generally international and European exchange and dialogue in digital education has never been as important as right now. This is a very good starting point. And this has been, though, a development, because in the start of the crisis between March and May, we saw a lot of individual efforts and perhaps isolated initiatives, which eventually gave way to a more structured dialogue. And I'm talking here primarily from the EU perspective, of course, which is my perspective, and where we have seen a much more active exchange on what is actually happening through the ministries, through the people working on the ground with the problems that are happening, and we have seen more and more calls for structured cooperation and exchange that can bring these people and these actors together, so that they can learn from each other and then they can share practices. And I would like to say that this goes beyond even the topic of quality assurance, as important as it is. And extends to things like the teacher education. For example, it has been observed in many member states that the perhaps skills levels of the teachers has been, when it comes to digital competences, not always perhaps what it could have been. We have seen other questions such as accessibility, which are extremely important for specific groups, questions of interoperability of content. And these are sometimes very technical issues, and sometimes they are a little bit further away from what the education practice is. And in order to bring these topics together, because they do belong together in the context of digital education, we have received the call to enhance this structured cooperation and this transnational exchange. How do we do that? By effectively listening to the stakeholders. And one of the proposals of the action plan is to create a European digital education hub. And I'm actually very happy that this is a proposal that comes directly from the stakeholders. So it is not someone who is sitting in Brussels or elsewhere, or a few people that have come up with this idea. It's the other way around, in fact. This idea reached at some point policy, and then we took it. And what do we want to do there is basically to enable this dialogue in a more dynamic and in a more inclusive way. And it is very, very important to do this in a cross-sectoral manner, because we are convinced that there are many challenges that cut across the sectors of education. And I'm talking here about the traditional sectors, primary, secondary, higher, vet, adult, etc. There are problems which are the same everywhere. Of course, there are problems that are unique also for the sectors, but it is important to bring this together. And it is very important to leverage on the national advisory services that exist in many member states on digital education, and to establish this type of dialogue so that the member states can start to talk to each other also in terms of their policy experience and what they have learned. Now, I cannot stop here before I mention one final example, and in fact, it is the hackathon that is taking place right now, the Digital Education Hackathon, because this is the example par excellence in terms of user-driven innovation. And I have to say, I'm very proud of what is happening here, because if you're familiar with the concept of the flipped classroom, where you put the attention to the learner, this is exactly what we have proposed in the first action plan, to put the attention to the people who can solve the problem. It's not people who are in Brussels or in Berlin or in Sofia or in Paris who can provide the solutions. It's enabling those that actually are closest to the problem and that can come up with some solutions, and empowering them and giving them the platform. So this is why, for example, we're proposing that the Digital Education Hackathon will become a core part of the Digital Education Hub in the future, and will be part of this spirit of transnational cooperation and exchange, more in terms of the user-driven innovation, because I think that we can innovate at different levels. As just Mark said, we can have people like students or the 5th, 6th graders. We can have some people who come with good ideas from the policy ministries as well. So if we bring these together, we stand much better chance to be successful.
Thank you so much, Georgi. This co-creation project, we have very good examples with it for the designing of the new Erasmus Plus program for the next generation from next year on. And I'm very happy to see that you work in the same spirit concerning the Digital Action Plan. So now we have analyzed the impact of the crisis on the recent past and on the present situation. Let's have a last round looking abroad. Where will we go? What do we want? And I'd like to start with Kaspars. What is the perspective of the Erasmus Students Networks, the highest priorities for the next 5 years in the field of educational policy making and the practice in Europe, from your point of view?
I think it's very important to take a look at this, because we are right now in a moment of time where we have a lot of opportunity to make decisions. From our standpoint, in the short time period, we're of course looking at the successful adoption of the MFF, so we can have a new Erasmus Plus program that starts in 2021 as expected, the successful implementation of the Digital Education Action Plan, which will lead down the line to the priorities that we see that's very important for the next years, which is to make education more inclusive, to widen participation, offer more peer-to-peer learning opportunities, because we have a lot of challenges that we as Europe are going to face in the next few years. And these require the active involvement of all parties, of all citizens, and accessible education opportunities will help us build a generation of Europeans that are actively engaged and will contribute with their innovations towards a better Europe.
Thank you. What's the point of view of the ESU, Gohar, for the future and in 5 years?
Yeah, I think there are really many things to envision for these 5 years. One thing that I would mention, obviously, at some point we will be over the pandemic and the restrictions, but I think it is important to make sure that when we have a kind of a normal life, where restrictions do not apply, we do not just, especially higher education, does not just go back to the old normal as we had, but really moves forward and builds up on the potential that was in some way showcased during these several months and revealed And universities didn't know that they could do it. They didn't know that they could so fast, so rapidly adapt to new realities and be forced to meet these new challenges. So I think it is important to understand that we need to build the new normal that will happen within the next 5 years. We need to make sure that we do not sacrifice the international dimension of education, that we do not lose all the bridges that have been built, especially within Europe, within so many European countries and universities. And there has been so much of potential coming through this for the students to grow, to get to know different cultures, to get to know different ways of managing education and experiencing things that they just normally wouldn't see at home. And it is important to make sure that we do not lose the social experience that students get in the universities. In my country, people often say that, even if you go to a university that doesn't really give you quality education, just the walls of that university will have some impact on you. So students in the university, they don't only get a formal learning experience, but they also get an informal learning experience. And this is an important part that we need to make sure that remains as a feature of education, and we treasure it, we value it, and we make it accessible for every single student, so that this doesn't become anything exclusive and kind of luxuriously accessible for students. I think this would be, the general priorities that I would identify for the next 5 years.
Perfect. I would like to live in a world how you described it in 5 years. Georgi, how do you see the world in 5 years once the digital education action plan is implemented and changed everything to the better?
I would like to live in that world, Stefan, that would be in 5 years that you just described to implement the action plan. But I think it's very important to be to look on the bright side. And I would like to perhaps state this in a very short manner. So I think that adapting a digital education for the digital age is actually a task for the whole society. This is not a problem for a university or for universities only, or for a ministry of education. In fact, if you look at how many people are involved in making this happen, you would realize how complex it is. So I think that this is the task that we have in front of us. We actually need to recalibrate a little bit the way we work when it comes to digital education. We have to get many more people on board, but make this also efficient and effective, because otherwise we lose a little bit the direction. And on this, I think that this is going to be a long journey, and I would like to pick up on the example of internationalization, of which I know that you're all very familiar. My idea is that the digitalization in education will be very familiar to us in 30 years from now, or in 20, maybe not in 5, similar to what happened with international. This is today core, and it's part and parcel of every university. It's core business. You cannot think about it without it. And this is what is going to happen, but it will take longer than the 5 years. Sorry, Stefan, we have the best intentions, but we'll take a little bit longer than that. But we're very committed to do more.
You're very committed, and I loved your citation from the movie The Life of Brian, that you always have to look on the bright side of life. Mark, you are in this business for the longest time, much longer than all the others on this panel. What is your picture of the future?
Well, that makes me feel old. No, but I actually feel young and passionate about what we're doing here. I think what we've heard from the panel discussion, but even more so from, if you get a chance to look at the 60 more plus hacks that are going on right now, is people are committed to breaking barriers to learning, including for our seniors, and inspiring through, I love that word, co-creation, for all of us to develop much more creative, innovative, imaginative learners, educators, and yes, even policymakers who are really capable of shaping and leading us through very uncertain times. So I'm optimistic, and I think there's a great energy we can harness going forward into the future.
Always look on the bright side of life. You made me a very happy moderator because of the quality of your answers, and especially because you were so time respectfully that we give back to Dmitri on the time which was accorded to us, although we started with a little time later. Thank you so much to the world, and please keep safe. Goodbye.
Thank you very much to the panelists. Thank you very much also to Stefan. You did very well. And if you're looking for a new stage name, just choose Justin. Just in time. Very good. Thank you very much again.